Okay, so thank you for coming to this talk on Android development. How many of you have done anything with mobile development before? Okay, and has that been on Android or on iOS? Okay, so we're talking about Android tonight. So an important distinction we have to make at the start is this. Obviously, on the iPhone or any iOS device, you have an iOS application. On Android, you have an Android application. There's something in the middle, and that's a web application that you can access from either device. Some mobile apps are starting to go that direction, where the application on iOS or Android is just a wrapper that basically just launches the website. But we're talking about specifically Android applications. The other two are built completely differently. We'll hear about iOS later today, but we'll be talking about Android. So what goes into an Android application? Well, it's an APK file at its root. That's your application. It's written in Java, which we'll see a bit later. But the way Android works is it's actually Linux. And every application on Android is its own user. And as such, it has its own permissions. This is a concept we'll see coming back to haunt us multiple times throughout tonight, is that every application only can go so far, and Android does what I think is a pretty good job of controlling where they can go. So you can see here that those red lines represent the boundaries of the application, and it can access other applications can't access it. Similarly, the application can't access the file system or the operating system unless it clearly specifies that it's doing so. So like I said, they're written in Java, and usually, although they're not required to, they're written in Eclipse. If you've seen Eclipse before, how many of you have developed in Eclipse? OK, so it looks like most of us. It looks like that. And people have a love-hate, but mostly hate relationship with Eclipse. It's a huge piece of software. It does a lot of stuff. It's also very buggy, because I feel like that's the pattern with most open source software. So here's the structure of your basic Android application. An application consists of one or more activities. And those activities are represented by a Java class. So when you're coding these, you'll make a new class for each activity you're creating. So now, what's an activity? An activity is basically a screen. That's the way you can think of it. It's a part of your application. If you're in an email application, you might have an activity for the composed message screen. You might have a different activity for the list of messages. So like I said, an application can have one or more activities, and each activity has one or more views. The views are done through XML. So you have some control over the presentation and layout there. If you want to think about it sort of in terms of how we've been thinking about other things this week, like with HTML and CSS, the activities are where your code goes. It's where your logic goes, and the views are where your presentation goes. So Brandon's going to talk a little bit now about the activity lifecycle, and I have to stand near him because we only have one lapel mic here. Okay. And this is essentially how activities and applications are run and how that works. OK, so it's a little hard to see, but basically, when your activity starts, this method called onCreate is called. So this is like your main method if you're programming in a different programming language, or not on Android, I guess. This one you'll always end up rewriting. It's called overriding, if you're familiar with object-oriented programming. Some other good ones, on pause. This is called whenever your application basically exits, sort of, although it doesn't really exit on Android. So let's say you are using the YouTube app, and you press the back button. In the YouTube app, they probably have an on pause that says, pause the video and save this spot. And then when the activity comes back, it's still sort of open. It's always open unless the operating system kills it, which is a little confusing. But basically, this will always be called when the application leaves the screen. And this is called when the operating system actually kills it. And the rest of this, you can go on the Android dev guide to read about them, but it's not really that important. One important distinction, too, with Android as opposed to other development environments is that Android actually decides when to kill applications. And it does this by figuring out how much memory it needs. And if it thinks it needs memory, it kills applications for you. So it doesn't work quite the way that a desktop computer would, where you can close applications on your own. And there are actually things you can download for Android that will claim to be activity task killers that will end the activities for you. But really, Android takes care of that. It's supposed to find out if it has enough memory and automatically just destroy the applications that if it needs to. So one more thing we're going to talk about in this presentation before we jump into code are what's called intents. So we talked about activities earlier, and activities are basically screens. And because of this whole concept of only sharing the information you need to in Android, activities can't actually talk to each other by default. They have to use what's called an intent to share information and to start each other. So intents in Android are a way for an activity to start another activity and also to pass information between the two. There are two different types of intents. One kind of intent basically says, OK, just go and start this activity, and you'd call that intent from one activity to another. And you can pass information there if you want to. The other kind of intent would be if you've ever used an Android phone and you click on like a YouTube link, for example, and then it pops up and it says, do you want to start this with YouTube app or your browser? That basically is the operating system saying, OK, here's a YouTube link. It's sending an intent out and saying which applications can accept this kind of intent. And in that case, the browser has an intent in it that's accepting the YouTube link, and so does the YouTube app. That's a separate kind of intent. So that's sort of the basic overview of the structure of Android applications and the basic components that go into making one. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually go through creating an application from start to finish. Were any of you by chance at our Android walkthrough part 2, I think it was a week or two ago? OK, that's good, because this is mostly the same as that talk. So we're going to get to coding.
Cool. OK. Actually, before we start coding, why don't we show you what we're going to make? So this is an Android phone, sort of. So you can't see. Let's fix that. Cool. OK, so I have the application on here. No, I don't. Sorry. OK, so I'll show you guys what it looks like. So here's the application. There we go. OK. So you have a text box. There's a button. The button says, what's the weather? You can imagine what it does. So actually, I guess you don't. So in here, you type in a zip code. So let's do CMUs. 15213. Click what's the weather. And then it looks on the internet for the weather. And look, the temperature is 43 degrees. And the zip code is 15213. OK, so this is the application we're going to be making today.
I hope this is somewhat impressive. For creating this in an hour, for not having done Android before, hopefully it should be. But we'll see most of the basic Android concepts through doing this. So if you guys have questions anytime while we're coding this, feel free to stop us. You're probably not going to be able to follow along. I don't think most of you have the environment set up to follow along. And if you do, we're going to go pretty fast anyway, just because we won't have time to go through it if we have to wait. So we're going to go straight into it. So we've already created a new project in Eclipse. And when you create the project, you can specify a bunch of things about it, including the API level. The API level is kind of important because that dictates what API of Android you're building against and what versions of Android your application will work for. I think this one is at, what, in 2.1? Mm-hmm. So 2.1 covers 97% of devices currently. So 2.1 is usually, if you're going for an application that's going to go on the market, what you're aiming for. But you can certainly, if you want to develop for another API level, like some of the newer versions of Android for tablets, you can do that as well. So we're going to run right into this. First of all, the thing you saw earlier that we ran the application on is called the AVD. It's an Android virtual device. And that is an emulator for Android. I'm actually not sure if that's technically correct. Is it an emulator?
Yeah, I think so.
OK. So it's basically running Android on your computer, or a simulated version of it. And that's so you can test your applications on the computer. You can also test them on your phone if you want to. And there's another way you can do that. So we've made the project here. And you can see we've got weatherappactivity.java there. So as we talked about earlier, every activity is a class. This is our first activity, and when you create a project, it makes one activity for you, and it's a class in Java. It also creates these methods for you, and you'll notice here we've got the onCreate method there, and that's automatically created for you, and that's going to override the onCreate that's we saw in the activity lifecycle, which basically means when the application is started, run this method. So if you guys remember, other than activities, we also have views. So we can also make a view for this, this activity, which is what we're going to do first, actually. So we can do that. If you look in here, this is probably too much to explain right now, but up in the source folder in the package is where our activities go, where our classes go, and then down here in res and then layout is where our layouts go. And main.xml is the one that corresponds to the activity we were just looking at. So this right here is the interface builder that comes with the Android development plugin for Eclipse. It's a piece of crap, and you should not use it really under most circumstances, but we're going to use it here because it's quicker than doing it the other way. You'll notice at the bottom here we've got two tabs, graphical layout and XML, main.xml. These are two views of the same thing. So when you look at graphical layout, that's just the graphical representation of what's in the XML file. So what we're going to do is actually throw some things on here in the graphical layout in the interface builder, and then we're going to modify them a little bit in the XML to see how they changed and to get some things in our code. So we're going to put a few things on here. What Brennan's looking at right now are the different text fields. So these are fields that allow you to input text into Android, and different ones allow you to put in different things. We're going to want one that just allows you to put in a positive number. You can see there's also one for a negative number or for a float there or for text. And we can resize that using little handles. Up at the top there, what he's doing is just changing the gravity. That's basically a way to justify things. And you can also change the margins. When you're doing margins, you have to use dp, which basically is a unit of measure that is not exactly a pixel, but it's supposed to standardize things across phones with different screen sizes. So it'll make you say dp there. He's also going to drag a button on there, and we'll rename that button a little bit later, but for now he's just going to center it. And then we're also going to put want to put a text on there too for it says weather time or something. We'll be able to edit all of the properties of these in the XML. So changing what the button says, changing what that text says. We'll do all that in a second. So this is the basic screen for our first activity in our application. So if we look in the main.xml now, you can see that in very large text, it's populated the XML with the things we just put in the graphical layout. And they correspond, right? So we've got this edit text here. We've got the text view up there. The text view is just basically the text that we saw at the top. Edit text is the text field that you can put stuff into. And there's the button. That should be pretty self-explanatory. So the main thing we need to do on this screen is to give things IDs. You'll notice the first attribute for each one of those items in the XML is this thing called Android:ID. And then it has this @+ID/ and then a name. The ID is really important because the ID is what gives you the ability to access these interface elements in your code. So it's not necessarily important what you name it as long as you know what it's named and can remember it later. So for right now, we need to give things IDs here. The button we can call get weather button or whatever Brendan decides. The other thing we can do for the button is this Android text property here is what the button says, so we can modify that as well. We're going to give the edit text an ID as well. And again, you're only editing what's after the @ plus an ID. And that's because when Android parses those tags, it will basically make values for you that you can pull out of your resources later. He's also changing the text view to say something other than large text. It's going to say weather time. So, OK, so that works. And we're going to make sure to save the XML file, which it looks like he's done. And if you go back to the graphical layout, we can see how it's changed. And sure enough, now the button says what's the weather, the text says weather time. So now I think we're going to run the application and see what it does.
Oh, I did it back then. Sorry.
Eclipse is mad at us because we messed up on our XML file somewhere.
Eclipse, if you press run application when you are currently looking at the XML file, it'll try and run the XML file.
Which it can't. So you have to go back to the activity. By the way, before you do that, this one line right here, set content view r.layout.main, that's what's setting the activity that we're on right here to use the main layout, the main.xml that we just created. And we'll see that come back in a little bit. So it's going to launch on the emulator that we already have running. And look, we've got stuff. It does nothing, absolutely nothing right now because we haven't told it to. But it blinks, so that's cool. So now we're going to tell it to do stuff. So now Brennan's going to talk about how we can access those interface elements from our code and how we can do things with them, like modify them or run methods. So I'll let you start that.
OK, so in our main method, what we want to do is we want to set the activity or the behavior of our button, first of all. So here's how you do that. Ignore why it's final for now. Actually, let's just not do this yet. So this is just like a basic variable declaration.
Have you guys done object-oriented programming before? So you guys know basically what this line's doing. We're declaring a variable of type button. We're calling it something. We're setting it equal to something else.
Right. Sorry that you can't actually. There we go. Right. So yeah. So this is how you get a handle on an interface element that you created in the XML. So you call this function, and you pass it the ID of the element. So we want to import button. OK. Eclipse is nice because it gives you a hint about why your code is wrong and then fixes it for you. OK, so we want to set the behavior of the button now. So here's how you do that. OK. Let me just write this. OK. So let me explain. So what we're doing is we're setting the onClick listener to a new onClick listener, which has one function, one method, I guess, called onClick. So in Java, you can't pass a function as an argument, which is annoying. If you could, this would be cleaner. But basically, this is how. What this is saying is, when we click on that button, we're going to run this code. So what do we want to do when we click on the button? Well, first of all, we want to get the text that's in the text box that we made, the edit text. So I'll do that here.
By the way, this thing where he's casting what he's setting it equal to back to the same thing he declared it as, that's just something that I think Eclipse prefers and yells at you if you don't do.
Right.
So that's sort of just convention. And again, we find this findViewById method, r.id, and then the thing we named the text box that people are going to put their zip code in. So we're just pulling the text box out into our code so we can do stuff with it.
And the reason I put this before the this here is because this technically refers to this class here, and we want it to refer to this whole thing to get this method out. So, right.
OK. So have we gotten the text out of there yet?
Why don't we do that first?
OK.
So we're going to just get it into a string. So this text right now is not a string object. It's an edit text. So you actually have to do this to get the. So this series of method calls, it's all in the documentation. Basically, whenever you're using an Android class, you'll be living on the Android dev guide.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have these memorized. I mean, maybe some of the simpler ones, but like you won't be expected to know all of these calls when you're writing an application. It's a lot of going back and forth and Googling and, and figuring out as you go how to do things. There's a lot of methods in Android that aren't necessarily obvious.
So I'll open up. I forgot to open up the browser. I'm sorry.
OK. So what we're doing with this is we're going to be making an application that gets the weather based on the zip code. So we're going to pretend the users put in their zip code to that text box, and we're going to use that to get the weather. So Brandon right now has open Chrome, and we're going to see how we're going to do that in just a second. So
Okay, that's good.
basically, to get the weather, we need to find some way that we can give the internet a zip code and get back a temperature. And we're not going to do more complicated than just the temperature. But we could do that with an API. We're not going to because we don't want to mess with having to use API keys at the moment. We just want to get it really simply. So we're going to use actually weather.com. And what we're looking for is basically a site that allows you to construct a URL with a zip code, and then at that URL will be the right temperature. And sure enough, this site works that way. So if we type in 15213, up at the top there in the URL, you can see, well, there's the temperature first of all. You can see that 15213 is in the URL. And what we actually found out just from playing with this is that you can take out most of that and just put in /today/15213, and it gets you the same page. So that's going to allow us to create a URL dynamically based on what the user inputs as their zip code, and then from that page pull out the temperature. We're going to do that by literally just parsing the HTML that's there and pulling out the temperature. This is probably not the best way to do it, but it's how we're going to do it. So if we go back to the other tab, and there's lots of interesting blank space in this giant HTML file. Temperature is 43. Yeah, so we're going to look for where that is in the HTML. With the liberal use of the control F function. That's not it. OK, this is actually it right here. And we can tell that too because there's the 32 and the 43. The other things in the table that we saw earlier are also nearby. How many of you guys went to the HTML and CSS talk, or at least know some HTML and CSS? OK, so most of you probably know about what's going on here. The and DEG semicolon is just the HTML escape sequence for a degree symbol. So we know we want to pull out that 43. So how are we going to do that? We need to find something around the 43 that only exists at one place in the document, so that basically we can search the document for that string and then say, OK, whatever's after that is what we want. We did this ahead of time, so it turns out we know that if you copy from, well, right what Brendan has right there, and we can test this really easily by just copying and then searching for it again. I think you need to do the call one too. The class equals TWC call one. OK, so you see up in the top right, it says 1 of 1, which means that particular string only exists in one place on the page, and it's right before the temperature we want. So using that information, we can parse out of this page the temperature. We're going to do that using something called regular expressions, which we're not going to cover here because they're complicated, and it would take another couple lectures to properly explain them. But just assume that we've done magic somewhere that allows us to give it that string and say, OK, get the stuff, get the digits directly after that string. We've actually written a library to do this that we've already imported into the project, so it makes it pretty easy for us. But this is a good place to have this lesson. You don't have to reinvent the wheel a bunch of times when you're writing your applications. If there's something that you feel like someone has probably had to do before, they probably have, and maybe they've written code to do it, and they've put it on the internet somewhere such that you don't have to do it again. So you can find libraries to do things, and if you really want to import a library into Eclipse, if you're developing an application like this for the hackathon, you can talk to us, and we'll help you how to do that. It's a bit unintuitive, and we're not going to go into importing libraries here. But we've made a library called parseWeather, and it has a function called getTemp, and it gets the temperature from an HTML file. OK.
So, right. Another thing in this library that we made is this an easy way to get data from the internet. So, on Android, I guess I'll explain this first. On Android, when any code that you put in this onCreate, if it takes a long time, it'll actually halt all user interactions. So, like if we said, just download weather.com, just in the main code somehow, it would freeze everything. People would think that your app crashed. You wouldn't be able to press any of the buttons. So I made a good way to get around this issue. So it's sort of like how we did the on-click listener. It's this. So you pass the URL, first of all. So that's www.weather.com/weather today. And then okay. So what happens is somehow things download from the internet, and you can come see me if you want to see how this is done. And then this method on download is called in the background when the data comes. So you can put other code after this, and it'll still run immediately. But what happens when you download the data won't actually happen until we actually have the data from the internet.
This has to do with threads, if you guys are familiar with that.
Right. So this actually needs to go into that method.
So by the way, what this does too is when it downloads that URL, it's going to store the full string of all the HTML from that page in this data variable. And then we can do stuff with it there. And so this parseweather.getTemp here is what actually takes the data, which is the full HTML of the page we just saw, and uses regular expressions and other fancy things to parse out the temperature.
Right. And if you're interested in that, come see us. OK. So now we have the zip code and the temperature. What we want to do now is basically display it. And the way we're going to display it is we're going to start a new activity, just to show how you start activities on Android. So let's do that. Actually, first, let's just see if this worked. OK, so I'm sorry about that. So on Android, this is how you log data. So this is like printf in C or system.out.println in Java. And that will actually work here, but log is better because it takes two strings. The first one is a tag, so we'll call it temp. And then the second string is what you want to log. So we want to say the temperature is temperature.
And the tags make things a lot easier if you're trying to debug multiple things at once, or you have multiple things you want to send messages to. When you're actually in the log, you can filter by tags. So you can easily see just what you want to see and not all of the other stuff that's going on.
And we'll show you that too. OK, so let's run this. Oh, let's not run this. So there's a nasty thing that you have to deal with, which Dylan mentioned. We're accessing the internet. So if Android just allowed people to write applications that send data or receive data from the internet, anyone can just write an application that's like a Hello Kitty wallpaper, and then it also listens to your keyboard strokes and then sends passwords to some server.
Have you guys seen on the Android market when you're downloading an application and it says, this application uses the following permissions? That's exactly what we're about to specify. And so if you see a Hello Kitty wallpaper, that application that's accessing the internet or your external storage, probably don't want to download it. I'm not sure why you download a Hello Kitty wallpaper in the first place.
That's actually a true application that actually.
Oh, it exists?
I mean, they took it off. No, like the application had a virus in it.
So we need to proclaim to Android what permissions we need. We do that via what's called the Android manifest. And manifest is actually a pretty semantically correct term because it's akin to a manifest in shipping something, right? We're telling Android, here's what's on board, here's what we've got. This also follows the convention of, you can see the Android manifest.xml tab right here. And that's the XML version of the manifest. There's also all these different graphical views we have of it that we can edit it in those ways as well. They're all the different views of the same file. We're just going to edit this one directly from the XML file. We use this uses permission tag here, and we tell it what permission we're using. These are defined as constants, I believe, in the API, and that's the one we want as permission.internet. If we had tried to run this without specifying that, it would have crashed, and it probably would not have told us why, because it's awesome like that. But we're just telling you ahead of time, if you're using anything, even like storage on the phone or the internet, you need to declare permissions, and you can look those up pretty easily on the Android website.
Okay, so now if we run this, it should work. Okay, so let's do 15213 again. 15213. We'll hit the button. So notice that there's no feedback because we haven't told it to have feedback. The button doesn't get disabled. There's not that loading thing that we saw before. That's because we didn't do that. And we will, if we have time at the end, go over that.
So the temperature did not display. Why didn't the temperature display?
We didn't update the weather time.
Right. So we only logged the temperature. We didn't update our interface at all. So hopefully it's there somewhere. I think it did it.
And we can look.
Brendan, sorry, question. What happens if you don't do the manifest? Like, what will happen?
The application will crash when it tries to access the internet.
Okay, cool.
And the stack trace won't really be that helpful.
Nope. We'll just get one of those force close messages.
So let's check the log. So here's how you do that. Oh, it did crash.
Oh.
Oh no. Well, this is a separate issue. Let's not look at that. Hopefully this is working. No. Okay. We can't see the log. Okay, we're going to display it. So something happened when I started my emulator. So Eclipse is really buggy, or more specifically, the Android plugin in Eclipse is really buggy. For some reason, the log didn't get connected to the emulator, so we'll just display it on the screen.
And you can normally fix this by restarting the emulator, except for the fact that the emulator takes its good old time to start up for the first time, and we don't want to waste 5 more minutes starting that up.
So this is how you display text on the screen. What this will do is it will make a pop-up cloud thing that will...
You guys have seen these before, too, if you have an Android phone. You probably don't know. You'll see what they look like when... It'll be familiar to you when you see it.
Okay. All right, let's try this. Okay. So. Now we wait. Okay, cool. It worked.
By the way, that's called toast because it resembles toast.
Right.
Pops up.
So that's another good way to debug because you can actually see it on your phone if you're actually using a phone. And hopefully your log won't break too. Okay. So we want to make the separate activity now. Here's how we do that. So notice this Java class file is called weatherappactivity.java, and we extend activity. I don't know if we mentioned this already, but this is essentially an activity. So you can make a class. You can make an object that isn't an activity, but every activity is an object, if that makes sense. So we're going to want to make another source file. So class. The name will be temperature shower.
The first time we did this, we called it temperature shower for like 10 minutes before we realized that it actually probably reads temperature shower. So we've just stuck with the name at this point.
Right.
But you can name it anything you want. It's the great thing.
And then the superclass is activity because it is an activity. And we hit finish. So Eclipse made this for us. They didn't include the onCreate method, which we need. So let's put that in. This annotation add override just means don't compile if I messed up some of the signature of the method. And this is good because if you get the parameters wrong, it won't actually override the method, and then your application will crash, and it won't tell you why. And you'll look for the bug for a while, never find it. So,
have some history with that there, Brandon. The other thing too, if you remember the activity lifecycle chart we showed earlier, there's all these methods, onCreate, onPause, onResume, onDestroy, that the operating system calls, and the operating system has default ways to deal with most of those. For example, if you're in one activity and you press the back button, it'll go to the other activity. So the add override just specifies that we're overriding that method. And there are some applications that do override the back button and do other things with it, as opposed to the default code.
Okay, so these two lines are very similar to the lines before. The only difference is this right here. So we need to make this layout. It doesn't exist yet.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make the layout for activity 2. And the reason why it's underlined there is because we haven't made it yet. And once we do make it, that underline should go away and Eclipse should stop complaining at us. So I think we're going to do that right now. OK, so this is just the new Android XML file wizard. And you can leave all the defaults here. There are more complicated ways to make layouts, but we're going to leave it like a simple linear layout for now. And this should look familiar to you. We've also got the graphical layout and the actual XML again. So we're just going to change what's there and give our application the screen to display the information other than the little pop-up thing. OK, so like last time, we're going to go in here and give things IDs so we can access them in our code. So instead of text view 1, we'll call that temperature text. And instead of text view 2, by the way, we're going to use that second line to just say at zip code whatever. So it'll say eventually it is this many degrees. The temperature is this at this zip code. So that's perfect. The other thing in here too is, if you remember last time, we changed these android.text or android:text properties to say something. We don't need to do that here. And that's because we're going to be setting this text dynamically. We certainly could change it right now, but in theory, the user won't actually ever see large text and medium text displayed, because before we actually call this activity, we will have changed that text dynamically. But you could change it if you want to.
OK. So one more thing. So the manifest again. We're back to here. You have to explicitly say what activities you're using so that it knows how to organize your application. Because like Dylan said, this is like the shipping manifest. So here's how you do that. We're going to do it graphically this time. So click on the application bar and then say activity. OK. Over here, so the name, it's convention to put a dot and then the name of the class. So temperature shower. And it actually needs a label or else it will crash, which was something that we found out.
The first time we did this talk.
The label will be temperature.
It uses the label, by the way, to display the name of the activity at the top, which Android does by default. And we'll see when we run it again. You can override that behavior, like with most things, to not show that little title, but that's what it needs the label for.
And see, when you save this, remember to save it. It updates this section here.
If you look in the XML file now, too, you can see that it should be there. Right, so it made a new activity for us. I'll reiterate, too. Anything you do in the graphical versions of this file will show up in the XML and vice versa. So there are multiple ways of editing the same file. OK, so now we have made our second activity, which is our second screen. And let's see. I think what we're going to do now is actually talk about something called bundles and intents. So you guys remember from earlier we talked about intents as a way to start an activity from another activity. So what we're going to do is, first of all, comment out that toast line there, because we're not going to be using that. And we're going to make an intent from this activity to start the other activity. Now, an intent is exactly what it sounds like. It specifies that we intend to do something. So we're going to create a new intent, and I'll explain this after Brendan writes it. But basically, you have to specify which activity the intent's coming from and which activity you want to start. When you're doing applications with multiple activities, this is something you'll have to do a lot because activities don't share information by default. You have to sort of pass them around, and you can use intents to do this.
And one more thing, notice that the source activity, since we're actually in that, we can refer to it by this keyword. But this other activity doesn't exist yet right now, so we can just the only way we can refer to it is by the .class file, which is the file that the compiler generates from the source version. So.
OK, so we'll talk about this line a little bit later. But what we're creating now is a bundle. A bundle is also exactly what it sounds like. It's just a bundle of things. We're going to pack up some stuff, and we're going to send it along with the intent. So the bundle is called extras. We're going to put stuff in it, and then the intent's going to have that bundle with it when it sends. The bundle works kind of like a dictionary, if you've seen a dictionary in other languages. So you have a key and a value. So you can specify the key. In this case, we're going to use temperature, the string temperature, and then the value is going to be the variable temperature that we already got earlier from when we parsed the weather data. We're also going to put in the zip code because we want to pass the zip code to the other activity too, so that it can display it. We don't need to pass the zip code over, but we're going to display it, so we're going to.
OK, so we have to change this to final, like I did before. The reason this is a debate that we are having, but the current hypothesis is confusing. So if you're really interested, you can come talk to us. But basically, just obey Eclipse. When it tells you to do something, do it. I mean, you can think of it conceptually. We're accessing some variable that happens at some random time. Like Eclipse doesn't know when onDownload is going to be called. So if we change zip code, then it might introduce like a race condition. And also, if the method exits, it will delete the data to the zip code variable. So if we put the final there, it enforces that this is what it's going to be forever. Never change it, and it can store it somewhere in memory where it just won't get deleted. So.
OK, so now we've made an intent, and we've made some bundled extras, and we've put the extras in the intent. And now we're going to actually use the intent to call the other activity. And we're showing you these because these are the most common sort of actions you'll have to perform when you're writing an application. There's certainly more complicated things you can do, though. So now that we've set up this application to send the intent, we need to set up the other application, or not the other application, the other activity, I'm sorry, to receive the intent. So we can do that again by declaring an intent and telling it to get the intent. And that get intent method just says, OK, get the intent that called this activity, that started this activity. And then we can pull the bundles that we put in back out of the intent and use those in our second activity. That method just takes the key temperature, the string temperature from the bundle and pulls out the value. It's a bit confusing because in this case our key and our value are named the exact same thing. But the temperature in quotes there is the string, not the variable. But it's going to return, that method will return the actual variable. So now we've got those two. And now we're going to do something that's pretty similar to what we did in the first activity. And that's the same line over and over again that just pulls an interface element out into your code so you can work with it. This should look familiar by now. You'll use it a lot if you program applications in Android. OK, so we have a handle on the text view that was in our XML file. And we're just going to set the text that's in there now. By default, it was, I think, large text. That was the string that was in there. We're going to set it to something else that's hopefully more useful than that.
So we'll say temperature is And it's weird. I don't know if you noticed that it said that this parameter was a character sequence. That's a string also. So you can just put a string in there and it'll auto cast that for us. And then we're going to do the same thing with the other texts.
So when he's typing find view by ID and then r.id and then the name of the ID that we created, Eclipse will actually complain if that ID doesn't exist. So that's a good way to figure out if you're not actually accessing what you want. Because Eclipse hasn't complained about that, we know that we've accessed an actual ID. Also, if you just stop at the r.id and then you press a period and then you just wait, Eclipse will show you a drop-down menu of all of the IDs that are available to you. So you can just select it from a list, which could be easier. So now I'm pretty sure this should be most of our functionality. So we're going to cross our fingers and run the application and hope the demo gremlins don't creep up on us. It's running so far. That's a good sign. Huh.
Maybe it crashed. We don't know because the log is connected. Oh, yes. Looks like it is.
We're going to figure out what we screwed up here. Someone see it?
I mean, this is bad. Maybe our URL is wrong. Let's hope for that. Otherwise.
No, it got it in the log. It got it in the toast message.
Oh, right. Let's toast it again. See if it shows up.
We're going to pretend this is a built-in lesson in debugging.
Okay. Maybe it'll work this time. Huh. Weather.com might be.
Yeah, they went down.
Let's check. Yep.
Okay, that'll do it.
Oh, my internet's down.
Yeah, weather.com's up.
Wait, sorry, my internet just died. Okay, so we didn't do anything wrong. I think Peter did something wrong.
By the way, if we were actually running an application for the market, we'd have error handling, which would do stuff like not crash when it can't find the internet, and maybe provide a nice little message that would say, can't find the internet. Okay, so it did finally crash, didn't just freeze there. Is there internet up now?
I'm connected to the log now, which is nice. Okay.
That's the internet.
Here we go.
Hey!
Look,
Okay, it worked.
the text changed.
And we also got that toast notification there too, but we can take that out now that we know we don't need it. Also, we could make this a lot more pretty if we wanted to, but we're not going to. But we're going to do a few more things. We've got a few more minutes. And these are some sort of little interface touches that will make the application a bit more usable. So one of the main things we want to do here is, if you look at the application there, we can put a zip code and we can press the button. And after that, we first of all got really no indication that anything was happening. And we also can press the button again, which is probably not good because that could introduce bad things for us. So what Brandon's doing now is he's modifying our layout here to include a progress bar. And that's a UI element that you can put in. It's over in the Form Widgets tab of the interface builder. And like before, we're going to give that an ID. It's called progress bar 1 by default, but it's our only progress bar, so we're just going to call it progress bar. We're going to go back into our activity, and pull it out like we have every other interface element.
So what we're actually doing here, write and not create, is we're setting it to be invisible so that you don't actually see the loading bar when you're not doing anything.
So by default, if you just put the loading bar on there, it'll just sit there and spin indefinitely, because that's what it does. So we'll make it invisible before we're doing anything, and then as soon as we're in the download method where it's waiting for the internet to do things, we'll show it, and we won't show it again after it's done.
And this is like really funky, but you have to look it up and then see it wants u.invisible.
Yeah, not something we knew ahead of time, something you can look up if you're looking up for how do I make a progress bar invisible in Android. It'll tell you to do that. It's also pretty ambiguous because there are like 6 different words for invisible. There's like disable or hide or like not show. Or, it turns out that's how you do that. So now when the user clicks something, we'll set the progress bar to start spinning, or rather just to show it, and it's already spinning. All right. So the other thing we're going to do is also disable the button after we clicked it, so that the user can't click it again. That's important for our code because we don't want it to try to run this method twice. We could build code in there that would prevent that, but if we just disable the button, then the user can't run it twice, and we don't have to worry about it. So up there, he's using that same line to get the button from the, actually, no, we already had access to the button from the layout because we used it for the onClick method. So we're just going to use that same variable to disable the button, which in this case is set enabled true in the. Is it supposed to be true there or false there?
I already said so.
Oh, okay.
Right. So when you click, it's disabled. But when we download, we want to see that basically if we go back to the screen and we haven't re-enabled the button, then you won't be able to press on the button. So that's bad. And we also want the loading bar to be on. Okay.
By the way, we didn't explain this earlier either, but that on-download method is what's called as soon as everything's been downloaded, it's called a callback. So after we've got the HTML, it'll then, after it's finished with that, it'll then call the on-download method.
Okay, let's run it.
Wait, let's try someone's zip code. Who wants to give their zip code?
07039.
07039. Where are you from?
Jersey.
Okay, it's going to be cold there too. Button's disabled, got a loading bar, and there's temperature.
Cool.
So you can use this application to find out what temperature it is, unless you want to use any of the other applications that already do this.
And look, it says temperature showtime at the top.
That was the label we had for our activity earlier.
Cool. Does
Okay.
anyone live somewhere warm? In the United States. Oh yeah, this only works for the United States because of the way weather.com works.
We're also, by the way, not checking to make sure that the user has entered a 5-digit number, which is something we would do if we're making an application.
Don't enter like a string.
I don't think
Actually,
about it because of the.
Yeah, it won't even let
Yeah.
you.
So when we did the layout, we only put in here a text view that accepts numbers. So sort of some built-in filtering there. Yeah, that text view won't accept strings.
But anyway,
No
does
one
anyone
lives
live somewhere warm?
303 that's Georgia.
Where is it?
Georgia.
No, what's the zip code again?
30332.
332. So they're having a little bit better time than we are, only by about a few degrees.
Oh look, we're just on time.
Okay, so questions?
Does the back button just go to the last activity?
So the back button by default goes to the previous activity. Yep. And you can override that if you
Right.
want. Many applications do.
Right. It's another method that you can just rewrite.
Cool.
Any other questions?
Oh, okay. We should probably do that. You're right. So we're from the Mobile Apps Club, which hopefully you've heard of and/or are on the audience for. And we're a club that does mobile apps. Pretty proud of it. So we gave this talk, modified version of this talk, a few weeks ago for members of our club. And we do things like this periodically. We also have a blog which has mobile news on it and other mobile opportunities around campus. So you should stay updated with that. It's cmumobileapps.com. We will be at the hackathon. At least I know I will be for the entire duration of it.
And I will be too.
And Brendan will be. And we'll have shirts that will distinguish us as mentors. And we'll be walking around. And if any of you want to choose to take on the daunting task of making a mobile application for your hack, we'd be more than happy to help you. It's admittedly not as bad once you understand what's going on, once you get everything set up. Or if you just have a hack that you want to make a quick mobile app for, this isn't unfeasible to do in 24 hours, especially if you've got mentors around that sort of know what's going on. So keep that in mind. We'll be there. That's Brendan. I'm Dylan. Unless you have any final questions, I think we'll wrap up.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, do you guys have any other resources by which we can learn this? Like, I just came in because I didn't know about it. So.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot to show you.
Shameless plug for the site. Oh, okay,
sure.
What is first?
Well, this is really good. So I don't know if this is the greatest introductory tutorial, but it's definitely, if you need to do a specific thing, you can go here. Or if you Google it, it'll probably take you here anyway. Okay. Our website.
It's very, very large on the screen.
I'm not using my. There we go. This is better. Sorry about that. Oops.
It takes months.
Okay. Well, it still doesn't fit, but okay.
That's better.
Cool.
So we've got some things on here.
Is that it?
Yeah, so we're going to attempt, and we're in the process of putting all the information from these talks, from this one and from pretty much the same talk we gave last time, on our website so that you can view them in your own time. At some point, we're also going to do a screencast of the same information so you can follow along if you want to.
Also, this is a really good tutorial. This intro tutorial, this is actually for Android 4.0, which is the new OS, but it applies to the other ones too. It goes into a lot of detail. It uses a lot of screenshots. Eventually, here's one. I guess that's not a screenshot, but here we go. So like it helps you set up Eclipse. It's very.
By the way, one of the biggest things too with Android we found from trying to do these talks is that people have trouble setting up the development environment because it's notorious for having little quirks on different operating systems that allow you to not get it set up. So if you're planning on doing a mobile app, we'd recommend looking up how to set up the development environment for Android beforehand. I don't think that's cheating according to the setting up environments is fine. So you can do that as long as you don't start your hack until the actual hackathon. But make sure you have it set up beforehand because otherwise it'll take an hour or two out of your hackathon time. Maybe not an hour or two, half hour to an hour.
And you can email one of us or find us if you have trouble.
If you go to our site and you click on the About tab, all of our email addresses are there. And we're more than happy to help anybody with mobile questions they have. So.
These guys are awesome. I highly recommend them.
It's true, we are.
Yeah. They're good friends of Sky Labs, and friends of Sky Labs. It's friend of yours.
Okay, so hopefully that can give you all the information you need. And like I said, if you're at the hackathon, want to do something mobile, then find one of us.